year is 341 BCE, and a butcher has been cutting oxen with the same knife for 19 years. He's never sharpened it, he's never replaced it, and the reason has nothing to do with the quality of the steel. There's a name for what he's doing, and 25 centuries later, psychologists at Harvard proved he was right. By the end of this video, you'll know why the more you force life, the worse it gets, and what to do about it on Monday. The weight of modern force? There's a particular kind of exhaustion that has no name in modern language. It's not physical tiredness, and it's not burnout in the clinical sense. It's something older than both of those. The exhaustion of a person who has been performing competence for so long that they have forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without an agenda, who has been optimizing, adjusting, strategizing, presenting for years, sometimes decades, and who wakes up one morning with the quiet, terrifying suspicion that all of it has been pulling them in exactly the wrong direction. This is the exhaustion of the high achiever, who wakes up at 6 to optimize a morning routine, tracks productivity metrics before lunch, and falls asleep reviewing a to-do list that never shrinks. It's not laziness and it's not weakness. It's the accumulated debt of forcing. We live inside a belief system that treats every problem as a nail waiting for a harder hammer. Hustle culture isn't a work ethic, it's a metaphysics. It assumes that resistance means you're not pushing hard enough, that friction is a sign of insufficient force, and that the only response to a stuck door is a bigger shoulder. The system rewards visible motion over invisible progress, input over outcome, and the appearance of grinding over the actual shape of results. You answer emails faster, attend more meetings, revise the presentation 14 times, and call it forward motion. But forward motion toward what goal lacks an answer? That question has been buried under the noise of doing. The corporate office has become a theatre of performed effort. The person who stays latest is assumed to care most. The person who sends emails at midnight is assumed to be indispensable, but no one measures whether the late night produced anything the morning couldn't have produced with a clear ahead. No one tracks the cost of the second revision that made the deck worse, or the third meeting that dissolved the clarity the first meeting created. We have mistaken the feeling of effort for the fact of progress, and the two aren't the same thing. Here is what the physics actually looks like. Imagine a person in deep water who begins to sink. The instinct is to thrash. The arms flail, the legs kick. The body fights the water with everything it has, and the water doesn't fight back. It simply lets the thrashing person exhaust themselves while gravity does what gravity was always going to do. The person who survives isn't the one who fought hardest. It's the one who stopped fighting long enough to let buoyancy work. This isn't a metaphor about giving up. It's a description of what happens when effort loses contact with the situation it's supposed to shape. There's a name for this pattern in cognitive psychology, and it has been studied for decades. Researchers call it the effort paradox. Effort is both costly and valued. A little of it makes something worth having. Too much of it destroys the very thing you're trying to build. When given a choice, humans and animals alike tend to avoid unnecessary effort, but we also tend to value what we work hard for. The trap is that there's a threshold, and once you cross it, additional effort doesn't produce additional value. It produces anxiety, resistance, and diminishing returns. A 2018 paper in Trends in Cognitive Sciences summed it up like this: a little effort increases value. Push too far, and value drops. Even more precise is what social psychologist Daniel Wegner discovered in the 1980s at Harvard. He ran a simple experiment. He told participants not to think of a white bear. The result was immediate and counterintuitive. The participants thought about white bears more often than people who had been given no instruction at all. Wegner called this ironic process theory. The act of mental suppression creates a monitoring process that ironically increases the very thought you're trying to suppress. The harder you try not to feel anxious before a presentation, the more anxiety your brain generates. The more you force yourself to stop thinking about a failed project, the more space that project occupies in your mind. The more you demand that a conversation go a certain way, the more resistance you create in the other person. This isn't mysticism. This is the measurable mechanics of forcing. And 25 centuries ago, a handful of hermits and archivists in ancient China described the exact same pattern without a single lab coat among them. The knife that never dulls. The year is 341 BCE. In the kingdom of Wei, a butcher named Ding is about to dismember an ox in front of a crowd. The bell has just come from the foundry. The timing must be exact. The execution must be flawless. And what the crowd sees next baffles them. At every touch of his hand, every bending of his shoulder, every step of his feet, every thrust of his knee, the blade moves with a rhythm that looks less like labor and more like music. You hear zip and zoop as the knife slides through the animal as though the bones aren't even there. When the ox falls apart, the crowd doesn't cheer the way they cheer strength. They stare in silence because what they have witnessed doesn't look like effort at all. The local ruler, Lord Wenhui, stops him afterward and asks the only question that matters. He wants to know how this is possible. Cook Ding lays down the knife and gives an answer that has survived for 2,500 years. He says, "When I first began cutting up oxen, all I could see was the ox itself. After 3 years, I no longer saw the whole ox. And now I go at it by spirit and don't look with my eyes. Perception and understanding have come to a stop, and spirit moves where it wants. I go along with the natural makeup. I strike in the big hollows. I guide the knife through the big openings, and I follow things as they are, so I never touch the smallest ligament or tendon, much less a main joint." Then he says something that should make every modern professional pause. A good cook changes his knife once a year because he cuts. A mediocre cook changes his knife once a month because he hacks. I have had this knife for 19 years, and I have cut up thousands of oxen with it, and yet the blade is as good as though it had just come from the grindstone. The blade isn't resting. It's moving more precisely than anyone watching can comprehend. Cook Ding hasn't stopped working. He has eliminated the wasted effort of pushing where things don't want to go. Lord Wenhui's response is even more telling. He doesn't thank Cook Ding for teaching him about butchery. He says, "I have heard the words of Cook Ding and learned how to care for life." There's a name for what Cook Ding is doing. The Taoists call it Wu Wei. And if your first instinct is to translate it as doing nothing, you're in good company. A lot of people do. But that translation is wrong, and the misunderstanding has cost the modern world more than it knows. Wu Wei isn't the absence of action, it's the absence of forcing. The action is real, the movement is real, the work is real, but there's no longer a gap between the actor and the action, no longer a self standing behind the movement, watching it, judging it, trying to control its outcome. The philosopher Lao Tzu, writing in the Tao Te Ching, put it this way: "In the pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In the practice of the Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less do you need to force things until finally you arrive at non-action. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone." I know what you're thinking. You have a presentation on Thursday. You have a relationship that needs fixing. You have a body that needs improving. And this sounds like permission to skip the work. But it isn't. The cook hasn't stopped cutting. The river hasn't stopped flowing. The question is whether you're cutting with the grain or against it, flowing around the rock or trying to push it out of the way. Edward Slingerland, a professor at the University of British Columbia who has spent his career studying this concept, defines Wu Wei as the spontaneous, a live and unself-conscious state of mind of a person who is optimally active and effective. It's not laziness dressed up as philosophy. It's the state in which skilled performance becomes so aligned with the situation that the usual cost of effort disappears. The concept appears as early as the spring and autumn period in Chinese literature, with examples in the classic of poetry. It became central to Taoism through the Zhuangzi and the Tao Te Ching, but it's not a uniquely Eastern idea. Confucius encountered it too. In the Analects, he describes the ancient sage Shun as a ruler who simply faced south in the proper posture and let the world order itself. The difference is that Confucius believed this state required decades of training and ritual discipline before it could emerge. Lao Tzu believed it required the opposite: strip away the conditioning, drop the performance, return to what is already there. The harder you push against the nature of something, the more it pushes back. Not as punishment, not as cosmic justice, simply as physics, as the way reality is structured. You can ignore that law for a long time. You can win against it repeatedly for years. You can build entire careers on the temporary victory of force over flow, but the debt accumulates, and it's always eventually collected. So let me be concrete. Here are 4 places where you're probably forcing right now, and what the situation is actually asking for instead. 4 places we force. The first place is relationships. You're trying to make someone love you, understand you, or choose you. You rehearse the conversation, you time the text, you engineer the moment so carefully that the other person can feel the machinery moving underneath it. And the more carefully you engineer it, the more they pull away, because what they're feeling isn't connection, it's pressure wearing a disguise. Yegner's white bear experiment applies here with almost mathematical precision. The more you demand a response, the more the other person monitors their own resistance. You're not building intimacy, you're building opposition. Wu Wei in a relationship doesn't mean passivity. It means aligning with what the relationship actually is, instead of forcing it to be what you need it to be. The second place is your career. You believe that constant hustle equals success, so you prepare for the meeting until 2 in the morning. You micromanage the project until your team stops thinking. You treat every email as an emergency and every deadline as a test of your worth. But here is what the effort paradox reveals. Effort, past the point of diminishing, return signals anxiety, not competence. The colleague who leaves at 6 and delivers better results isn't working less. She's working without the wasted motion of trying to control what can't be controlled. She has stopped managing the anxiety of uncertainty and started managing the work itself. In Taoist terms, this is Te, natural power, the efficacy that emerges when everything false has been stripped away. Not less work, less wasted work. The manager who trusts the process doesn't do less than the manager who hovers. She does exactly what the situation asks and nothing more. But here is where the pattern gets harder to see. The first 2 places are about forcing outward toward other people and toward your work. The next 2 are about forcing inward against yourself. The third place is personal growth. You're trying to fix yourself every day. The morning routine that has become a second job. The meditation app that tracks your streaks. The self-optimization that has replaced self-acceptance. You treat yourself as a problem to be solved, and the result is a person who is very good at performing improvement and very bad at actually feeling any of it. This is the hardest one to release because it looks like responsibility. It looks like taking yourself seriously. But Ziran, the Taoist quality of naturalness, means simply being what you are without performance or agenda. The performance of improvement isn't improvement. It's theatre, and theatre is exhausting. You don't need to become a better person. You need to stop performing the idea of one. The fourth place is control. The spreadsheet with 17 contingency tabs. The conversation you rehearse 14 times. the future you try to predict and manage before it has even arrived. Control is a substitute for trust in people, in processes, in time, and it's the most seductive form of forcing because it looks like prudence. But there's a difference between preparation and compulsion. Preparation leaves room for the unexpected. Compulsion tries to eliminate it, and the unexpected doesn't negotiate. The person who plans every variable isn't safer than the person who plans the essentials and trusts the rest. They're just more tired and no more prepared when the real crisis arrives. Here is where this lands for you. Every one of these 4 areas contains a version of the same question. You need to know the difference between the effort that shapes the river and the effort that simply exhausts you while the river goes where it was always going to go. Most of us never ask that question. They call the asking laziness. They call it giving up. They call it madness. But the hermit's question isn't ancient. It's happening in you right now, in whatever you're currently trying to force into a better shape. The science backs it up. The ancient observation and the modern finding are the same phenomenon described in different vocabularies. The Taoists watched the world and noticed that forcing creates resistance. Daniel Wegner put people in a lab and measured it. Here is how ironic process theory works inside your skull. When you try to suppress a thought, your brain splits into 2 processes. One tries to distract you, the other monitors whether the forbidden thought has returned. That monitor is always running in the background, scanning for the exact thing you don't want to find. And because it's scanning for it, it keeps the thought active. The more you try to force it down, the more neural fuel you give it. This isn't a mental trick, it's the architecture of attention. In 2008, 2 researchers named Charles Lim and Alan Braun peered into the brains of professional jazz pianists while they improvised. They found something striking. When a pianist switched from playing scales to improvising, the lateral prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for conscious control and self-monitoring, deactivated, widespread, and across the board. Meanwhile, the sensory motor systems lit up, and the anterior cingulate cortex, the region that detects conflict and stays alert in the background, remained active. This neural pattern is worth understanding. The lateral prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that steps in when you're trying to override an automatic habit. It's the fire response team. The anterior cingulate cortex is the smoke detector, always scanning for conflict. In a state of skilled improvisation, the fire response team stands down. The smoke detector stays on. The result is a brain that's alert without being anxious, responsive without being rigid, creative without being chaotic. The brain wasn't shut down, it was integrated. The conscious mind stopped interfering with skilled action, and the skilled action became more fluid, more responsive, and more creative. Slingerland connects this directly to Wu Wei. The goal isn't to eliminate conscious thought, it's to get the 2 systems working together smoothly, the fast automatic hot system and the slow deliberate cold system, mind embodied and body mindful. This is why the more you force a creative breakthrough, the further it retreats. It's why the presentation you rehearsed 14 times feels wooden, while the one you walked into with a single clear idea and listened your way through feels alive. It's why the relationship you micromanage feels brittle, while the one you allow to breathe feels solid. The science doesn't say stop trying. It says stop hacking where there's a gap. And here is what most people miss about this moment. The research isn't the end of the story. It's the permission to try something different, not on faith, but on evidence. The practice. I'm going to give you exactly 1 practice, not 5, not a philosophy shift, but an action. Pick 1 recurring situation this week where you currently force an outcome. Pick 1, not your whole life, 1 situation. Before you enter it, state this clearly, the actual shape of this situation and the places where you're pushing, where there's already a gap. If it's the meeting you're dreading, don't rehearse your points 14 times. Walk in, knowing the shape of the room, listen for the gap, and move through it. If it's the conversation you're avoiding, don't script it. Know what you need to say, then let the other person's response tell you where the opening is. If it's the project you're micromanaging, identify one decision you can delegate without checking, and don't check. The goal isn't passivity, it's precision, and the knife is still moving. It just isn't hitting bone. Try it once. Notice what changes in the room. Notice what changes in your body. Notice what changes in the outcome. You're not trying to become a different person. You're trying to become a more accurate one. The river reaches the ocean not because it fights every rock, but because it keeps flowing. The fighting is optional. Drop a comment with this. Tell me where in your life you're currently forcing something that the situation isn't asking for. I read everyone, so subscribe. We go this deep every week. Perhaps the greatest strength isn't learning how to push harder. It's learning what no longer needs to be pushed.